Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's structured conversation, Launching and Building a Career in Student Affairs Assessment, with Dr. Michael Christakis, Joe Levy, Whitney Brown, and Ciji Heiser. My name is Carrie Klima, and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the SAAL Professional Development Committee, I thank you for participating in today's structured conversation. I also want to thank our panelists, Dr. Michael Christakis, Joe Levy, Whitney Brown, and Ciji Heiser, and the SAAL PD Committee, as well as Shelley Pleasance and Margot Saltonstall from Northern Arizona University for all of their help in putting today's presentation together. A few logistics before we get started. You are able to adjust the size of your chat box. On the left-hand bottom corner, you'll see that chat box, and you can adjust the size to ensure that you can read others' comments and our comments as well. I encourage you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through chatting. And you also have various tools that you can also respond with. If you look in your participant window right under your name, you'll see an icon that has a show emoticon button. And if you're feeling so inclined, you can share an emoticon that you have and that you want to respond with. The button to the right is a step away from the session, so if you need to step away, you can click that button. We will primarily be using the chat room for questions and comments. If you have a microphone and you want to offer a comment, please raise the hand, which is the third button under your name, and we will turn on your mic so that you can ask your question through the microphone. Also, we will be conducting one poll today where you will be asked to respond from a multiple choice question. And this little A box will have an option that you can select which response you would agree with. So when we get to that slide in the PowerPoint, you'll be able to respond to the poll using that A box function. Okay, let's get started with today's conversation. Assessment and evaluation in student affairs is often considered to be something you fall into. However, it is a growing functional area within the profession. As a profession, we have seen an increase in positions and job requirements specifically calling for student affairs assessment and evaluation experience. This structured conversation will cover how to launch and build your career in student affairs assessment and evaluation, particularly how you can engage in experiences to move into and up within student affairs assessment and evaluation. This structured conversation is brought to you by the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders in support of Careers in Student Affairs Month. As a result of participating in this structured conversation, participants will be able to describe experiences of student affairs professionals who work in assessment. They will be able to identify challenges working in student affairs assessment and strategies for overcoming them. They will be able to explore resources to stay up to date with student affairs news and assessment best practices. We will identify assessment skills most important for student affairs professionals to possess, and discuss the current and future opportunities for student affairs assessment work. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Michael Christakis serves as the Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of Albany, and he will be joining us very shortly. We have Joseph Levy, who serves as the Senior Manager for Co-Curricular Assessment at the University of Phoenix. We have Ciji Heiser that serves as Assistant Director for Assessment and Strategic Initiatives from Carolina Housing at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And last but not least, we have Whitney Brown, and she is the Coordinator of Student Affairs Research and Assessment and Staff Development at the University of Alaska at Anchorage. I want to thank you all again for joining today's conversation about launching and building a career in student affairs assessment, and it's my pleasure to launch our discussion. Before we get started, we wanted to engage you all and ask a few questions of you to see, a question of you to see about your experience with assessment and your work in student affairs assessment. So if each of you can respond to this in the poll option, again, this is under your name into the participants window with the little A box around it. So what percentage of your current job responsibilities includes assessment work? So A, 0 to 20, B, 21 to 40, and so on. So great. It looks like we have quite a few people that are maybe interested in assessment and student affairs but aren't currently responsible for conducting assessment in their office, about 58% so far. Great. Well, this gives us some really nice feedback for our panelists today to understand who is participating in our structured conversation. So we have a person that has maybe 0 to 20% of their responsibilities as assessment work, all the way up to E, where 81 to 100% of their job. We have about 6 folks that that's a primarily portion of, or 81 to 100%, I'm sorry, is the primary function of their position. We have someone that says they work in academic assessment, interested in student affairs assessment. So I think we have a wide variety of interests in student affairs assessment here, and so this will be, I think, a great panel to learn about the different aspects of student affairs assessment. We have some great questions for our panelists. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists, and if I can have each of you introduce yourself a little bit more than what I provided as an introduction, and as well as how many years you've worked with student affairs assessment. Why don't we start with Joe?
Here we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Levy. I'm the Senior Manager for Co-Curricular Assessment at the University of Phoenix. Just a little additional background on me. I got my master's in Student Affairs and Higher Education at Colorado State University, and I then went to work for Campus Labs. If any of you are member campuses, I was an assessment consultant, which was an amazing opportunity because I got to work with close to 50 different universities and got to see their assessment experiences and help nurture strong cultures of continuous improvement. From there, I then went to work at the University of Chicago and then Western International University as a director of assessment, where I not only did student affairs assessment, but I also did academic assessment. So for the academic assessment person on the line here, you have a fellow compatriot. And then, yeah, now find myself at the University of Phoenix doing this work.
Great, thank you, Joe. And Ciji, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ciji Heiser. I have been doing assessment work for 7 years. Joe and I defined, we were having a conversation about whether you do it full-time or whether it's part of your job. So 2 years it was just an additional responsibility, and then the last 5 years have been full-time. I've been at UNC Chapel Hill. There is not a really strong assessment infrastructure here, so I find that I often have the opportunity to go sit with our associate vice chancellor and talk about assessment at the student affairs level as the only person who does assessment full-time in student affairs here at UNC Chapel Hill. I got my master's in education from Kent State University, and I'm currently finishing up a master's of science in educational research methodology and pursuing my PhD in the same topic. Mostly student affairs assessment with a little bit of academic assessment in terms of aggregating some rubric data that we have from one of our education classes. And we can talk about that more if somebody is interested, but that's all for now.
Thank you, Ciji. And how about Whitney?
Hi everyone, my name is Whitney Brown. I'm the Coordinator of Student Affairs Research Assessment and Staff Development at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. I've been in my role about 3.5 years, and I'm not originally from Alaska. I'm from upstate New York. I was at the University of Albany previously, previous to moving to Alaska. I got my master's in public administration and education policy. And it's exciting to serve on the panel today with Dr. Christakis because he was my supervisor and mentor when I was a graduate assistant at the University of Albany. So he helped me get my start in student affairs assessment. So it's exciting to be where I'm at now. And so with this role and my grad preparation, I've been in about 5.5 years.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we'll go ahead and get started with our questions. And I know that Dr. Christakis is very busy as a Vice President of Student Affairs, so as soon as he's able to join us, I'll have him introduce himself. But for now, we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions. So the first question that we would like you each to answer or talk about would be, what does your typical day look like in your role?
Okay. Well, it seems boring to recount it, but I start the day, quick check of my email, making sure there's no immediate emergencies, and then dedicate some time to looking at the news and seeing what recent higher ed articles are out there, and seeing if there's anything to note for specific functional areas that I work with. And then throughout the day, I typically have some check-in meetings. I work with about 18 different co-curricular areas at the University of Phoenix, so any given day I can be meeting with any number of them. And during those check-in meetings, we're just usually looking to see how they're executing on their assessment plans, or checking to see if they have any questions or issues that we can work through, and I can better support them as they look to lead assessment for their areas. And then I may have reports or instruments or methods to review, give feedback on, or help develop. Also, right now, a lot of my day recently have also included some checking in on accreditation work. We have an HLC visit coming up this coming year, and so I'm helping with our assurance writing team, both in collecting evidence as well as authoring some assurance information. And then the other piece that might slip into the day is some external efforts, like working with SAAL or doing things like this.
Great, thank you.
I would say that my day typically falls into one of two categories. My day is either focused really on instrument design and data analysis and reporting, or it's at the other end of the spectrum. We're focusing more on planning and looking long term at the impact of our entire department on students, towards student support and student learning. So that's a lot of email. It's a lot of relationship building. I invest a lot of time and energy in getting to know the people in the 13 different functional areas in our department. Because sometimes they can't always articulate what they want, and so by knowing what's important to them, it really helps me be more effective and help them get what they need from a data-driven perspective. It also helps me help them have parameters and expectations. Sometimes people come in my office with a really great idea that could be someone's dissertation, and if I have a better relationship with them, it helps to curb that a little bit. And get them down to a place where it's something more manageable and meaningful for their day-to-day work. But I would say it's really split between those two things, planning and then the daily grind of analysis and reporting.
This is Whitney. I found that answering this question was a lot harder than I anticipated, and I think that's what I enjoy most about my role, is that each of my days are very different. One thing that is very consistent is I'm not really a morning person, and it's very early here in Alaska. It's well, now it is 8, but so it always starts with coffee, and this bad boy, it's a if you can see, a 5-color pen, and so my to-do list is very critical to me every day. I'm very much a list maker. I think it comes with the assessment cap. So anyways, fun fact about me, I'm a list maker, and the multicolored pen saved my life. But what my typical days look like is very much what Ciji said. It's a lot of talking with people, a lot of getting to know what their priorities are and how I can best support them in their work. But my work tends to be very cyclical, so depending on the alignment with our assessment calendar, there'll be lots of periods of time where I may be working independently and analyzing data and publishing reports. I'm also working closely with our student affairs research analyst, who I supervise as well. And then other times it's very full of meetings and meeting with our department directors and their staff to develop their assessment plans for the year, do periodic check-ins throughout each semester to help move those assessment plans along. So I would say it's a lot of report writing throughout the day, and then a lot of consultation meetings as well.
Great, thank you all. What has been your most challenging experience in the student affairs assessment profession, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, so for me, I should also clarify the caveat of my perhaps unique background. I again worked at Campus Labs, which while they work and partner with colleges, it is a company, in the outside of the nonprofit realm, and both University of Phoenix as well as Western International University, where I worked, those are within the for-profit sector, which is not the norm when it comes to higher education. And I would say the most challenging experience was my job at West. I knowingly entered that position taking on the role of director of assessment, so leading both academic as well as co-curricular assessment, knowing that the institution was just put on notice with HLC for 4 different things, one of them being assessment. So I was very aware of that going into the job, and was prepared for the hard work that was going to come about. But one of the things I didn't anticipate was the just general lack of awareness and somebody, sorry to get distracted. Somebody asked, mind clarifying what HLC is. HLC is the Higher Learning Commission. It is one of the regional accreditors. So depending on what your institution is, you may have SACS, Middle States, New England, WASC. So HLC is just the Midwest one. But yeah, the institution, I had a lot of work to do on the academic side of the house, but more than that, I had a lot of work to do on the co-curricular side of the house, because there was no student affairs division, or there was no student services division. A lot of what we would consider student affairs areas were treated just as operational elements. And so there was a lot of culture changing in terms of looking to assert myself not only as somebody experienced with assessment, but also somebody experienced within student affairs, and what that means, and how an institution should represent that, and that student learning does occur outside the classroom. So it was a big challenge, and also having to revamp a lot of their assessment practices, because what they were doing wasn't necessarily good practice, hence why they were on notice. But the way I overcame it was, one step at a time. Like anything else, there was a lot of education, a lot of laying a foundation, getting the right buy-in from different institutional leaders, referencing literature and research, so that this isn't just Joe's idea, or this isn't just the new guy coming in to shake things up, but to truly bring industry practices into my approach, and to validate the way we were going. And like any other good assessment effort, taking it slow and taking the small wins where you can get them, and not looking to measure and do everything all at once, but really chunking it out and going for the small but continuous improvement patterns, because truly assessment is a process. It's not just an isolated incident. So yeah, it's something that thankfully went well. We, after being there for about 2 years and putting in an all new strategy, we were removed from notice and commended on our assessment work. And then that's actually what led to my new position at University of Phoenix. They saw the good work I was doing there and snatched me up.
Great, thank you, Joe. That is very insightful.
I think I'm next. I think some of the challenges that I've seen are, if I had to group them together into a theme, I would say walking that fine line or creating the balance between culture and competence. I've seen this across student affairs. We launched an outcomes-based education initiative, and I've seen people really get excited for the idea of the initiative, but feel very stuck when it came to implementing it. And that was because some of the ethos and the culture around assessment hadn't really been developed across student affairs yet. And I see a little bit of that in our department. I'm fortunate in that people that I work directly with in the department, I would call them hungry and curious. They really want to know the impact of the work that they're having. And the more assessment data they get, and the more informed their decisions become, the more they're able to improve their programs and services and what they really care about, the more culture strengthens, as well as their competence, because whether they know it or not, each time we go through an iteration, they become a little more responsible for another piece of the assessment design or reporting or analysis, and so, or launch, any kind of part of the assessment cycle, they start to take a little more ownership over each time we go through an iteration. That's one way that I've been able to overcome it, but again, we may not have a culture of necessarily competence or a culture around assessment across student affairs, but being able to leverage people's curiosity around the impact of their programs has been a really successful strategy for me. I have also used assessment data as a recognition tool to reach kind of my outliers. So I will couple together whatever data I can find or what people have shared with me or I've collected myself for the department, and I will use that to recognize efforts that maybe people don't get to see every day. So the specific example is that we have a facilities team who every time they complete a work request, that student gets a survey with 5 questions around satisfaction. It's pre-populated, and they get just astronomically high response rates, like in the thousands for every for each of the work requests. And also they also have a really high level of satisfaction. And so one time in the department meeting, I pulled that data up and said, FYI, the 3 guys sitting in the back of the room are doing phenomenal work, and they all turned various shades of red and got really excited and had their heads down, and like they didn't want to be called out. But afterwards, they were like, we've never looked at it that way. Like, we just look at the trend of responses as they come in. We didn't realize that over the couple of thousand work requests that we complete, that students were that satisfied with our work. And so those are the 2 strategies I have used to help build a balance between creating a cultural assessment, but also helping people develop their own skills in their assessment practice, both departmentally and across student affairs.
Thanks, Ciji. I'd like to share 2 challenges, and I'm also excited to be speaking to the newer professional perspective as well. The first challenge that I faced, I think, was more related to being a newer full-time professional, more than assessment. So coming into my role out of grad school, I was very excited, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as most fresh out of grads are, and I had an excellent mentor coming out of grad school as well. So I wish Dr. Christakis was on the phone right now so he could hear me tooting his horn a little bit with how well he prepared me. So coming into my new role, I was going to be managing an assessment team. And I would say my biggest challenge transitioning into my new role is that I came in too quickly, I would say. I didn't devote enough time to acclimating to the culture at the institution and seeing how they approach assessment and how their assessment readiness is. I came in with very excited ideas on where we could move the needle for them with assessment, and I learned quickly that you need to build that foundation of trust and mutual understanding with those on your team, and so that was more of a big lesson in being a new professional and managing the team in that way. So a big recommendation I would have is to, even if you have a very clear plan for how to move a culture of assessment from A to Z, you need to have the cultural readiness in place and the community and trust for a team and the buy-in to get there. So the strategy that was really helpful for me is after maybe like 3/4 of a year in that position managing the team, we did a planning retreat for the year ahead. And what I did in doing so was we prepared that agenda as an open space agenda. So when the team got to the room, they expected my very structured agendas, you know, my to-do list. And I had a blank agenda that day, and I empowered the group to create our own plan for the year, and it was a much more collaborative process. If anyone is familiar with World Cafe, open space is one of the models that they use, and it was super dynamic, and we created 3 working groups as a result of that on our assessment team. So we had a group working on student employment assessment, we had a group working on key performance indicators and data visualization, and we had another group working on building assessment capacity. So it really allowed the group to work on something that they're really excited about. So yeah, that was a very helpful strategy for me. So check out World Cafe if you haven't done so already.
Great, I just made that note myself. Thank you, Whitney. Okay, our next question is, what is your go-to resource to stay up to date with student affairs news and assessment practices? I think, Joe, you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can expand on some of those resources.
You know, it's interesting. I struggled coming up with an answer to this question, but you know, where I would say that I look for most recent happenings, honestly, is on I look on Twitter. I look on the, you know, we have the hashtag SAASSES. Yeah, let me write it out.
Oh, can you type that in?
Yeah. And while it may not always have activity, you know, every day, it is a stream of data specific for assessment and student affairs assessment. And so it's always interesting to see their, you know, articles that are coming out, or webinars, or just support for one another. You know, there are also I also look a lot to the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders listserv, but often that's a place where people are asking questions and seeking answers or responses. One of the things that Twitter also provides is people just to celebrate. You know, a lot of times people will have an awesome meeting, or they'll just finish a report that they've been working on, and they'll post about it there. And it's also just a great place to recognize and support one another within this assessment community that sometimes maybe people don't send an email out about to the large group. But yeah, I mean, among other things, that's one of the places I like to check, as well as to contribute to as a real-time stream of information.
Great, thank you. Maybe Whitney, did you have some resources?
Yeah, I would say that the most valuable resource that I look forward to every year is attending the NASPA Assessment and Persistence Conference. That's a great investment that I've made for myself to go every year, and it's a more intimate conference than the larger annual conferences by ACPA or NASPA, and it's specifically we have a question that's asking, is it separate from NASPA in March? Yes, it's in June. And so it's always super inspiring and re-energizing coming at the end of an academic year. And it's a great way to connect with folks that are doing assessment as their primary role. You have a lot of teams that go that are building their assessment cultures, but the other population that's going are folks that are doing their assessment in their full-time role, and it's like the best. And every time when my goals are changing in my role, it's great to be able to go each year and then dive deeper into the content area related to that goal. So my job right now is transitioning more into data analysis related to enrollment management, and because enrollment services lives in student affairs at my institution. So I was able to really connect with folks that are in the enrollment services realm, which was new to me coming from an institution where enrollment services wasn't part of student affairs. So that's a really great conference. If you haven't been to it before, I highly recommend it. The other one that's more of a day-to-day kind of resource, I really enjoy Higher Ed Live. They have a lot of podcasts, and they have different categories. They have like an admissions category, student affairs general, and so they're not as lengthy as some of your traditional webinars. So I really like tuning into those as well.
I do a lot of reading of books. That's kind of my jam. I enjoy it. Sometimes when Joe and I are having conversations, he sees me like reaching and like pulling through things. I usually get made fun of a little bit, but I tend to look on like the NASPA websites, ACPA websites, Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, the Assessment Commons. There are lots of different places to go and find information. Any book releases on any of those websites are really helpful. But I also find the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders website, as well as the our listserv and the Assess listserv, to be really active and really informative. And I find that it's very educational just to be on those listservs and reading all the comments and discussions that come through.
Great, thank you. And we have the distinct pleasure, thank you so much, Dr. Christakis, for making it onto our webinar.
I'm sorry I'm late.
No problem. I think I can recap some of the resources that your co-panelists have highlighted, but maybe before we do that, if you want to just introduce yourself really quick to our group and kind of your perspective on student affairs assessment.
Sure, happy to. Again, apologies for my being a little bit late. My name is Mike Christakis. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs here at the University of Albany, and before I became Vice President, I was Associate and Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs here, and as part of those roles had assessment responsibilities. In fact, in some ways, we've come a long way at Albany. We've got an assessment office that we've been able to stand up now, but that was not the case when I was in those AVP roles. I had the real good fortune, I think this was probably the highlight of my career, was working with Whitney Brown, who was my graduate assistant for 2 solid years doing assessment stuff. So that's the background. And again, I do apologize for being late. I was sometimes you don't expect things in this role, so something came up.
Right, we all understand. So some of the other panelists have talked about some of the go-to resources, highlighting social media, hashtags, Twitter, the NASPA Assessment and Persistence Conference, various tools like podcasts like Higher Ed Live and listservs. So are there any other go-to resources you would say that you would offer to stay up to date with the student affairs assessment practices?
I was going to mention Twitter. I mean, Twitter, I'm pretty active in that space. And as any of my panelists would tell you, I'm probably a pretty good Twitter follow to begin with. But I think that in terms of assessment, I will say another good follow is Joe, Levy, who's on this panel with me. He tweets out some great stuff as it relates to resources in student affairs assessment. But I, certainly in assessment, and it's not just student affairs assessment, but it's really this higher education assessment. but also just how we can use data more effectively in the work that we're doing. You know, I'll tell you, in terms of podcasts, and this is something I may have been the last one to join, sort of drinking this Kool-Aid, but this 538, you know, this is the Nate Silver's group, has got a great podcast just on data. And it's not about higher ed or student affairs data, it's just on data and how organizations and people use data to inform decisions. I think it's just a great podcast to listen to. And it casts just a slightly wider net for us. You know, I think sometimes we can get very caught up in, you know, utilization data of our health center, which is important. But what are we doing with that data? How is it informing our decisions as an organization, as an entity? So I would just sort of, in as much as you can follow, you know, the Harvard Business Review is something that I started following a couple years ago, just from the perspective of leading an organization. But a lot of the stuff they write about is how leaders make informed decisions based on data. And I think that is something we're responsible for as student affairs assessment leaders, is how do we use data, all types of data, to, you know, improve our students' experience, certainly, but improve our organizations as well.
Great, thank you. And I think we have there we go, some requests for some Twitter handles.
What was the name of the podcast that you referenced, Mike?
The podcast, I will tell you exactly what it is. I will pull it up on my phone. My Twitter handle, by the way, is @Mike Christakis, if you want to follow me. The podcast is, this is 538 does, this is Nate Silver's group. One of them is called Sparks, which is just, it's not Sparks, I'm sorry, hang on a sec, that was the, it's called What's the Point? And the idea is, what's the data point that you're trying to get at? The last one that I have last Thursday was called Sparks. It was on mental health stigma, which I thought was very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. The other one, which is also 538, for those of us who are sports enthusiasts, is Hot Takedown, also done out of 538, but it's on sports data, which I think is also, you know, we talk a lot about predictive analytics in higher ed these days. You know, what was that movie? What was the book? Michael Lewis's book? Not Moneyball. Was it Moneyball? I mean, that was using data, right? Wasn't that the athletics baseball team using data? I mean, that's using data. So the Hot Takedown is the sports version of it, and then of course there's just the standard 538 political podcast that is very active this season.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question, and before we have our wonderful panelists respond, we do have quite a few wonderful individuals participating in this podcast that have assessment experience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask those of you that are attending this podcast, not our panelists, if you can type into the chat window, what is the most important skill you think all student affairs professionals should have? And I'm going to start typing those from our chat window onto the PowerPoint, and then after we see some of your responses, we'll open it up to our panelists to share. We'll give the panelists a little bit of a break for a second. So what is the most important assessment skill you think all student affairs professionals should have? You can just type that into the chat window. Great, so we have connecting information to action, writing SLOs, curiosity, capacity, communication, flexibility, adaptability, Interpreting data to stakeholders. Closing the loop. These look great. Wonderful. I think that gives us a good base, and I think you all can continue kind of reading, and I'll kind of try to capture some of these thoughts in a few words. But I'll turn it over to our panelists if you all want to respond of what you think most important skills are for assessment that all student affairs professionals should have. Whitney, do you want to start?
Yes, I was just going to volunteer.
Oh, great.
So the skill that resonates most in my mind right now also has to do with part of the work I'm doing, which is finalizing our annual report. And so the most important assessment skill I recommend everyone have is to be able to write succinctly and to be able to synthesize results well. And I feel a bit of responsibility in supporting my team in that with the framework I provide for them in reporting. Helping our staff to clearly connect what the goal is, what institutional priority their goal relates to and why, and to clearly provide an update on progress made towards that goal. So being able to clearly communicate what your goal is, what you did, and why it's important is super important, and I continually find that a priority for helping my staff develop in that area.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from our panel? Go.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily been mentioned yet. I know communication and listening were mentioned, but interpersonal skills. You know, one of the things I like to start my relationships with the areas I'm working is, you know, I tell them the dirty secret about my job, which is I have no authority over any of them. And that's often the case with assessment people is here we are giving them guidance and often giving them templates and showing them how to do the assessment work. And we're often the ones receiving reports and reviewing reports. But at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't turn their report in on time, there's nothing I can do about that. You know, I can maybe talk to their supervisor, but I can't personally hold them accountable. So ultimately, knowing that in order for me to be most successful with them and in my work, I know that I need to develop strong relationships with them. You know, we need to establish trust early on, and to a certain extent, I need to build their respect and hopefully also a bit of their affinity, because if they don't like working with me or don't like hearing from me, it might not be a good process, especially if they need a lot of support to do this work. A close second to the interpersonal skills, I would say, is enthusiasm. Oftentimes, I was an English and math major in undergrad, so not necessarily the most liked subjects, but I think assessment sometimes falls into that category. But when somebody comes with passion and excitement around an idea, if nothing else, people want to hear more, and they maybe want to understand, well, how can I get that excited about the information or about this survey and what it could mean for me.
Great, thank you.
Joe, I just wanted to say how much what you just said about just being honest with your staff resonates with me. I find that a challenge as well, for my role, and that you're setting these expectations for folks who have few levels of positions higher than you in the chain, but you're requesting a lot of information and providing them a lot of guidance, but the accountability structure doesn't always support that. So I agree with you completely that those interpersonal skills are super important.
I would add that there's a difference between kind of sharing data with stakeholders and interpreting data back out to different audiences, and that's different than being able to take data from its raw form and translate it into information that's usable for people and that clicks with people. And oftentimes I have found to make that happen, I need to know what they care about, because that's also going to get them back to the table so that I can get them to give me what I need. It's a process built on reciprocity. I help them collect the information they want to improve their programs, and in return I need the action items and the steps that they took because they had that information. But the ability really to translate data from a raw blob into usable information that generates a little bit of excitement for other people is a really powerful skill set, and it can be really challenging to do that.
I also think that and this is echoing, I think, what the previous panelists just said, but I think we need to be ambassadors of our work to show value in why we assess and what we do with the data. I was struck by Joe's, I think, appropriate sentiment that there's sometimes limited authority that we have, which can be frustrating in our work. I've certainly been frustrated with it. I will provide the caveat that while there is limited authority in our work as the person who is tasked with assessment for the division, there is a good amount of authority that I have as vice president. So, and I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, right? So my staff know, they do, that assessment is really top of the mind all the time, and whether they like it or not, I think most of them like it, honestly, these days. But they also, I think, are realizing the political environment we are in working in a division that places assessment at really the center of everything we do. So, I've talked with colleagues, and I think I wrote something some time ago about sort of the important role that the Chief Student Affairs Officer has in leading this effort. And it's not, I really love my job, but I also really enjoyed the time that I was working with Whitney, for 2 years doing assessment and the types of things we were doing then. I like this job more because I've got that authority that I didn't have as much of then. So getting your vice president, and my sense is many of you probably have very supportive vice presidents, to understand the value and to be able to act and speak with a level of authority on our programs and our services based on the work that we're doing in student affairs assessment, I think is really important. So, again, circling back to my initial point, being our own best spokespeople, I think is really important, particularly as it relates to articulating the real true value of why we do what we do in assessing our programs, our services, and our activities in student affairs.
Great.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, it's one of the things I'm dealing with right now is it's a fine line to walk of being that ambassador, because where that can be dangerous, not so much in your case, Mike, where you have the authority and you can set this expectation with your leaders throughout the division, but where it can be somewhat dangerous as an assessment person who doesn't have that authority is that if you're the main speaker, if you're the main person sharing this information and touting assessment's importance, then it could potentially just further root the idea that assessment is something separate, or it's something that the assessment people do, you know, oh, Joe's writing another article or talking again about the importance of assessment, and maybe they believe that and they applaud it, but it doesn't have as much value as it could have coming from the people themselves. And so one of the things that I'm working on right now, even with my team, is I've certainly put myself out there as being one of the big champions of assessment, and now that I have many other people who have drank the Kool-Aid and are doing the good work, now I'm gently nudging and encouraging that they be the ones that, you know, put out a next, you know, newsletter, or that they be the ones that put out the next announcement that goes out, you know, to the full university about the value of assessment or the benefits that have come about. Because if it keeps coming from me, it's somewhat going to be old hat, and it's expected coming from, you know, the assessment area. But if it starts coming from areas like career services or admissions, or even somewhat obscure areas like, you know, we have financial aid and registrar that are included in our student affairs area. And so even those areas asserting themselves and saying, yeah, we do have associated student learning outcomes, and here's the great work that we're doing there. You know, that just, in my mind, that has, you know, even more clout and power in embedding assessment throughout the university. But yeah, first and foremost, you know, we have to be our biggest champions. But yeah, I know now the challenge I'm dealing with is motivating and getting people to feel comfortable to be the ones to toot their own horn in the work they're doing.
I've started to ask my team members before we leave, like, our assessment committee meetings, like, what's one fact that you can take away and talk about? Like, what's one data point that really stuck with you today? And that kind of turns them into champions, because people like to feel like they know what they're talking about, and they like to feel confident and intelligent, and like they can engage in the conversation. So I've tried to find ways to give them the tools to do that, and that's one mechanism. And I find it, especially with our younger staff, like, well, 98% of student staff said that they like training, so I don't know why they should change it. I mean, they get this like sense of like pride, a little bit of arrogance, like they just feel really great that all of a sudden they have this like one snippet of data point that they can then kind of take with them and tout with them around their different meetings. And I think it helps people get more comfortable talking about the information as well.
So for our last formal question, and then we'll transition into question and answer, the question and answer part of our panel, what opportunities in the field or for the future do you see for student affairs assessment work? I'll let you all decide who should go first.
I'll jump in because I was late. I would say that, and this may be because it's the drum that I happen to be beating on campus here at Albany, but I think there's a real role for us to play in the narrative around our institution's work as it relates to retention, time to degree, completion, probably more so than I think we have. And I think that you know, there's plenty of stuff that's out there that talks about the impact that co-curricular experiences have on the student experience. And I think we need to be able to point to those students that are in those experiences, that have those experiences, or those groups of experiences, and how those are contributing to them being retained into their second year, persisting through their academic career, particularly at the institution, and then how we're contributing to graduation rates. There's also, I think, and this is not new, but I think there's still an opportunity for us to really tap into the post-graduation information as well, as much for program improvement as for making the case to prospective students. You know, we know at Albany that our prospective applicant pool, which continues to grow, we have the largest applicant pool that we've had in our history this last time around. I think it was 30,000 applicants for a freshman class, that they are very key, these are the students now, although I would say that some of it is the parents, are very keyed into career, which sometimes is hard for faculty to hear, because when they hear career, faculty hear vocational, and that's not what an education really ends up being about. But at the end of the day, from a consumer's perspective, you know, you've got U.S. News, Newsweek making the case, you know, is college worth it? Well, if you're the student or the parent, you're saying, well, can I get a job when I'm done? And in the instances where career and career and professional development report into student affairs, especially, or even if they're reporting into academic affairs or development, I still think there's a case to be made with capturing good data, particularly first destination data, for where our students go. And so I think really from, you talk about the pipeline of information that we've got, you know, I think there's a role pre-deposit that we can have as well in this when you sort of key into what students might be interested in. But I think it also, as you follow the student through, what those different experiences are throughout their time on our campuses, and then once they're gone, what do those experiences, how do those impact their first job, you know, life. I mean, you know, Gallup, I think, has done some really good work in terms of trying to tie campus experience with career, with life wellness. I mean, it's a, you know, Gallup has done some really good work in this space. But I think having a greater role and a more significant voice in owning the data that's ours, but sharing it institutionally and talking about how those experiences are impacting our students' experience, particularly around metrics that, if you're a large public like we are, your elected officials are really keyed into. You know, for me to say to the legislature, or for me to say to our president, to say to the chancellor, to say to the legislature, you can tell them that our students are really satisfied with our Welcome Week activities, means nothing. Legislators don't care about student satisfaction with Welcome Week activities. What they care about is which of those students were retained in their second year and to what extent did that variable contribute to that experience.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off of what I was going to say to this question alludes to, has a component of the storytelling piece that I know Mike mentioned, is, you know, well, one, student affairs still, despite all of us on the phone and many of the people online having assessment-related positions, student affairs still has a bit of catch-up to do in terms of having appropriate resources for student affairs assessment. You know, again, when I was a consultant and worked with many different universities, there were a lot of schools I worked with where there wasn't even a primary person whose full-time job was student affairs assessment. There were a lot of institutions where, you know, that was just like 20% of somebody's job, and they were tasked with, you know, leading committees and so forth and so on. Now, that was several years ago, and I've watched the field and number of positions grow, but there's still a lot of room space to be acquired there for student affairs assessment, especially if we think about the long entrenched and established academic assessment efforts. There's also potential for merging of those areas, and I think that's one of the things when I think about storytelling and the future of student affairs assessment, I see there being great opportunity for academic affairs and student affairs to create these hybrid assessment positions where the focus is not where the learning is happening, the focus is just on the learning, and that, you know, we're truly telling this story of student success, and we're able to, with one person in one report, trace this arc of here's a student, here's how they're doing in their class, they went to tutoring, this is the support they got in tutoring, they also met with their advisor, this is the feedback we have from the advisor, and we can tell this we can put together a profile of the complete student experience inside and outside of the classroom and talk about what positively impacted that, what negatively impacted that, and what we can do as an institution to better support that. And we're starting, you know, I know of one position at least that Leslie DeSouza, if I'm saying her last name correctly, she's another great resource on Twitter, but she works at Ryerson University in Canada, And her position title is Manager of Student Affairs Storytelling. That's her actual title. And she was an assessment person, and now she has this task of being the storyteller. And hopefully, to Ciji's point, succinctly telling that story, but really pulling out of these reports and working with different areas to tell that story of how students are learning and how they are moving through this college environment and how student affairs is best supporting and contributing to that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that storytelling and for institutions to start recognizing the value in adding to those resources and giving more resources on student affairs for assessment people. But yeah, I mean, and maybe I'm just living in a fantasy land, but that's I think the future and the opportunities that I would like to see.
I'll hop in next here. One of the biggest opportunities that I see for us as well, and kind of along the storytelling vein, is how we're communicating our data out and making it accessible to our administrators on our campuses, and part of that being data visualization. When we talked in the last question about the most important assessment skill that all student affairs professionals should have, one of those that I would add to the list that that's really important to give you an extra edge is web skills. I'll share the link here in a minute to our Student Affairs Assessment website, where we have our interactive KPIs. And I feel like this has been really valuable for our staff in being able to disaggregate data and look at different populations of our students by digging deeper into the data points to see what's behind the numbers. So that's an opportunity for us in the capacity building realm for developing our staff to have the skills to create those spaces where you can dive into the data deeper. I feel like it's a smaller population on our campuses that have the skills to delve into databases, and so creating user-friendly platforms for our staff to be able to disaggregate that data and operationalize it is really important. So I'll share that link in a minute.
Yeah, I think I would echo the rest of the panelists of just saying that there's kind of two things that I've heard, and that I would put them together in saying that understanding the story of all of the students and the impact of all of our collective services on student success and learning, but also which services are impacting which pockets of students differently or equitably. And I think that that's a really important story that we're starting to care more about and dig more deeply into. Whitney brought up the ability to disaggregate data, and I think that we're starting to ask more critical questions. When I hear things like, well, we have a 97% retention rate, my next thought is, who's in that 3% and are there trends? And I think we're starting to ask those questions and dig more deeply into those areas in order to tell a more comprehensive story about not only the services that we provide, but for whom they help be successful. And that's a really important part of our narrative as well, in my opinion.
Let me just jump in really quickly, because I think this has been a great discussion. I want to provide one visual as we sort of move on to the Q&A portion, and that is, when our provost started, we started about the same time. I started about a month before he did. He, in fact, during his interview process, mentioned the student experience, and the visual is the student is sitting in some sort of vessel on the water, a canoe, a boat of some sort, and that there's two oars in the water, and the one oar is the academic curricular oar that in most cases really draw the student into the institution. The other oar is that co-curricular oar. It's all those experiences that they're having outside of the class, the traditional classroom. And his point was that the student needs to be pulling on both oars to move towards graduation, or to really move towards student success, if you will. And I raised that visual because I've used it every summer since he mentioned it during orientation. This is the way we frame it to our 2,500 new freshmen and their parents, is that we are committed to the student experience in and out of the classroom, and that, you know, your student is that student sitting in that boat pulling on both oars. But I think it speaks to where I started out saying that I think we need to be very clear that the experiences that students are having through our programs and our services and our activities are contributing to their success and to the skills that they're gaining going forward. It's not just about the traditional academic transcripts. It's as much about, I'm not going to say more, but at least as much about the experiences they're getting that complement those academic curricular experiences.
Great, thank you all. We have about 4 questions thus far from our chat window. We'll go ahead and start with, to what degree do the panelists use an analyst versus having a thorough understanding of their own data analysis? So for example, do you run your own multiple regressions, or do you use analysts that kind of run the information about your data?
I was going to say, I come from an institution that, although my department values assessment, that does not mean the institution necessarily does. So there aren't a lot of opportunities to kind of run my data to an analyst, and I'm an input and learner strengths in my top 5, and so my kind of response to not having that go-to resource was to get the skill myself. 3 PhD staff classes later, I can run pretty much any kind of statistical analysis you can think of. It wasn't as hard as it sounded, and I was very grateful for that, but I kind of took it upon myself to make sure I had both skills. Had I had analysts available to me, I definitely would have used them, but I probably would have made the choice to get the skill set myself anyway.
Yeah, and for me, maybe it's somewhat similar to Ciji, or maybe it's actually the opposite of Ciji, but I've been in a position where there's always been some other analysts available, but one of the problems then that I've run into is a lot of times these analysts are used for the whole university, and again, especially in some of my experiences where I've been working in institutions where co-curricular in general, let alone co-curricular assessment, is maybe not at the same level as, or even as established as other entities. So a lot of times my data requests would fall to the low bottom of priority. And so because of that, then that pushed me. I mean, I always wanted to do more, but it certainly provided impetus for me to teach myself a lot more advanced analytics. And I geeked out when Ciji and I talked the other day, and she was talking about how she was building things within R, and that's one of the latest things that I've been learning about as well, is utilizing R as a statistical analysis tool, which it's fantastic. It takes definitely some getting used to and some learning, but it's not as intimidating as it seems, and it has so much power. But getting back to the point of where I said I'm opposite of Ciji is, I've actually been told in my most recent position, because I'm within an area of assessment and institutional research, and I'm the only co-curricular person. The rest of my office are academic assessment people, and then we have an IR team. And I was recently told, because I was asking for permission to download the latest version of R, and I needed admin rights to my work computer, and my boss denied it because she said, well, you have the IR team at your disposal who are trained analysts, and you should use them before doing any of this work on your own. And so then I said, okay, well, if you're not going to let me sort of do this work on my own, then I'm going to flood them with data requests, because I was going to be taking time to do all this. But if you're saying I can and should use this team, well, then I'm going to use them. But unfortunately, it's not quite worked out that way. I haven't quite gotten that data support that I was promised. So I'm still looking to use some of my own analysis. But what I would say, especially if people are newer to this work or especially just looking to get started with some assessment work, is you can go a long way with just some very basic data. Now, absolutely, you could be missing some larger trends and important pieces of connecting data and seeing true relationships between variables and richer information that could come from statistical analysis. But even just getting people to look at the basic data, just frequencies and means, to then report the basics, sometimes that can be a huge win. And while they're doing that, you can be trying to work on securing some additional analysis support, or else developing it with yourself.
And I think we have a follow-up question. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say that we just actually hired a research and data analyst in our student affairs assessment area. We hadn't relied on that historically. Certainly didn't rely on that when I was doing it. In fact, I relied a little more on Whitney in terms of doing data analysis. But I will tell you that since we brought this data analyst on in student affairs, and we've used baseline for a long time in our work in assessment, the sentiment I've gotten from our assessment office now is that what baseline is producing is almost too simple, that we need to be able to do more. And Eric Walsh is the guy who we hired, and he's extremely smart, a lot of energy, but he wants to be able to do more in the data analyst space. So in our case, we're relying very heavily on him and Doug Sweet, who runs that office.
Yeah, I'd like to just echo that as well. In my second year in this role, we hired a data analyst for student affairs, and it was a huge asset to have that. Similar to Joe's experience, we, in theory, have access to our institutional research office, but our requests aren't always in the top priority, so it was great to be able to have the resources to hire that position. And then about a year ago, we transformed our data analyst position a little bit to be a research data analyst, and that position reports to me, and it's really enhanced our collaboration together, because before we worked really in isolation from each other. I was doing assessment and he was doing data mining, and our projects never really connected. And now with our relationship, we're able to work on the same reports to enhance each other's work. So for example, if we're doing a study on our non-degree seeking student population, which is about 3,000 students on our campus, I'm able to do the reporting and survey aspect of those students to get that qualitative feedback from our students about their experience. Why are they, what are their motivations and goals as non-degree seeking students? And then he's able to do the population data analysis on those students. So it's really helpful for that collaboration when pushing that data up to our administrators, because some people are really drawn to that narrative and the qualitative feedback from students, while other people are more numbers oriented and they want to know the data points straight and clear. So having the blend is super helpful. So we were very fortunate to be able to hire someone to help in that capacity. Oh, and I'm gonna just one more thing to add. When we hired our more recent research data analyst, one of the first training we provided for him is he went to the AIR conference, the institutional research conference, and that's where he learned about art as well, and it's been tremendously helpful in helping build those kinds of skills. So if you're interested in learning more about being able to do some more statistical analysis, I'd recommend that conference as well, because he had a great experience.
I just want to second that sentiment, and I'm a NASPA loyalist, true and true, and national co-chair of the assessment KC. But bar none, the best assessment conference I've ever been to has been the AIR forum. It was really exceptional. So sort of in the realm of resources and where you could go to really tap in and learn things. I mean, that was just a remarkable gathering. And it was in New Orleans. This was many years ago, but it was really great.
Maybe if we can have two of you touch on, I'm going to blend two questions together, see how we're doing on time. We did have a question about how have you been asked, or have you been asked by academic affairs to distinguish between assessment and research? And I think it could connect to a question we have in the chat window of how do you approach working with colleagues that don't have understanding of the data and the limits that you have? So I'm kind of thinking if maybe you can approach this a little bit broader and say, how do you negotiate your relationship with academic affairs assessment and kind of explaining and understanding the use of your data and the limits that you may have with it based on do you have an analyst person or not? So kind of maybe a general, is that clear to my panelists?
I'll just say that in student affairs we've benefited from a very good, healthy working relationship with institutional research, which for all intents and purposes is nestled in academic affairs. So I've benefited from folks in IR that lean on our expertise in the student affairs realm to inform their work in the assessment data side of it. So I think that speaks to some of the comments we were making earlier about skills. I think it's being able to work with people. We've also been really good about trying to be as inclusive as possible in our assessment council meetings, professional development gatherings, brown bags, half-day workshops, where we include our IR folks to be at the table with our student affairs folks, and they have in turn reciprocated that. So we're all speaking the same language. But we also, I think, all acknowledge that we've all got particular strengths given our areas of expertise. But that, it's about relationship building. One of the first, when I started doing assessment at Albany for the division in November of '07, the very first meeting I had was with Bruce Celeste, who was our director of IR at the time. I mean, that meeting happened monthly for almost 8 straight years after that. I mean, and that was, I think that's proof positive of the kind of investment of time you need to be able to make with colleagues in academic affairs to work towards a common cause and a common good.
Thank you. I think we'll transfer into or move into one last question that's a little bit different, but I think ties into the topic of our kind of addressing a little bit of our topic today, and particularly since with the poll earlier we had a lot of individuals that weren't necessarily in student affairs assessment yet, but are maybe interested in it. One person asked, are there different functional areas that translate better into assessment? Would you have any recommendations maybe for our grad students that are going to be entering in and may not go right into an assessment position, but maybe a functional area that would lend well?
Go ahead, Whitney.
The direction that my work is going right now in the departments I'm working more with are in the enrollment services house, and that their priorities are entirely data-driven right now. So our admissions folks and recruitment, especially understanding who your population is, what their needs are, especially at an institution like ours where we're an open access institution. We have everything from certificates in vocational programs to PhDs, so we have quite the breadth. And so those positions in enrollment services would really benefit from folks who have assessment experience, being able to do data mining in addition to other traditional assessment methodologies is really important.
Joe, did you have something?
I was just going to say, I don't know if, there's particular area. Like, I guess the safe way to say it is I don't think, or I believe that assessment professionals can come from any functional area. I think it's more the mindset, the skill set, and the belief in wanting to be data informed. You know, there's every functional area in student affairs has the potential and should be involved in assessment work. So therefore, there can be really strong people gaining experience and coming out of those areas. I think the important thing, especially if you're looking to get into it, is to raise your hand and volunteer and get involved I mean, there's one of the great things about assessment, if you're interested, is there's always people looking to give the work to somebody else or looking for support. So when you do raise your hand and make it known that you want to get involved and you're excited and willing to take on additional work for it, I mean, you will have lots of people responding and looking to utilize you. So even if you're in an area that maybe assessment isn't the most prevalent, but you're interested, again, if you make it known to existing assessment people or to other areas, they'll be happy to take you on because, again, this is where it comes back to my point before of student affairs, you know, may not be providing the appropriate amount of support or resources for people doing assessment work.
Thank you. Do we have any last-minute final thoughts from our panelists before we close the structure conversation? Okay. Well, as we conclude today's session, thank you again to Michael, Whitney, Joe, Ciji, and our Professional Development Committee of SAAL, and particularly Shelley Pleasance for helping to bring today's conversation to you all. A recording of this structured conversation and the materials will be provided in a link shortly after. And as a reminder, our next structured conversation will be held on November 8th at noon Eastern, and that was sent in the update email from SAAL's PDC. And Rebecca Goldstein from Florida Atlantic University will be sharing her expertise in using dashboards to visualize data in student affairs, and to stay tuned. And make sure you stay tuned in the listserv for more information and registration information. And if that's all, I just want to thank our panelists again and appreciate everyone's involvement and in the conversation in our chat room as well.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye, all.